Hello, my name is John for Through the Eyes of George, and today we're going to talk about books and where do you get your information. George Washington loved to read. He never went to college or to a university, but I would say that he was well read. And we're going to look at what type of books he read and where he got his information. But before we do that, don't forget to check out my website, POTUS1.com, POTUS, the number 1.com, or my podcast and my book, Through the Eyes of George. I am coming out with a second edition of Through the Eyes of George. It'll be coming out in a couple weeks. So, George Washington, in his personal library, had around 1,200 to 1,295 books. This is to include, but not limited to, a lot of things on history and politics, horticulture, agriculture, things on husbandry, philosophy, economics, a lot of stuff on economics, a lot of stuff on literature and poetry, all kinds of stuff. But where do you get your information? How many books do you have? You know, behind me here, right here, is a lot of biblical research books. I am a Christian, and I love reading Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew, and the Eastern manners and customs of the times of the Bible times. And I enjoy reading the King James Bible. Over here, I have books on manners and etiquette, as well as different types of political thought. And then from here to here, I have my over 53 George Washington biographies. And I have other books in my room and in my apartment where I live. But I just love to read. I love to read pretty much anything you can get your hands on of all different ideologies and philosophies and languages, so I can get a full scope. And that's just like George Washington. And I think that's what really gravitates me towards how George Washington thought, is he loved to get a full scope of reading. And some of the books that he read, some of the authors, his favorite, most absolute favorite play was Cato. I don't know if you knew that. Excuse me for the burps. Excuse me. But yeah, his favorite play was Cato. He loved Cincinnatus, and another book of his that he enjoyed very much is Don Quixote. I didn't know if you knew that. I thought that was pretty interesting to know. And then James McPherson is another literature. Jonathan Swift. And then also, of course, William Shakespeare. Some philosophy type people that he liked. He liked Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, Economics. Voltaire, and then, of course, John Locke. John Locke was very important. And then also, the King James Bible. The King James Bible. George Washington was an Anglican Christian, and he read the King James Bible. And he also had an affinity for learning about like I mentioned before, like husbandry or farming or agriculture, because he loved Mount Vernon so much. But some quotes about George Washington in books. He said, George Washington, he said this to Jonathan Boucher, or Boucher, on July 9th, 1771. George Washington said, "I conceive a knowledge of books is the basis upon which other knowledge is to be built." What is your knowledge of books? How many books have you read? And if you don't like to read physical books, when you go online and look up and read things, I'm sure if George Washington were alive today, that's what this whole channel is about. Would he just go to Fox News, Washington Times, DC Drano, PragerU, and Politics and Turning Point USA? Would he just go to that type of philosophy, or would he go and look at other types? No, George Washington would go to, if he were alive today, look at all those different types of political thought, but then also Vox or CNN, MSNBC, Boston Globe, Slate, New York Times. He would CNN. He would go to how to get a full scope of what people believe on a different political spectrum, different types of economics in today's culture, because that's what he did. He had different types of the sides of the table with economics, philosophy, gardening, agriculture, all kinds of stuff, architecture, and everything. Another fantastic, amazing quote about George Washington. If you are an architect or a painter or anything like that, George, this is the quote for you. It's George Washington. I can't pronounce this name correctly, but George Washington said this to Binode and Galliard, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, on February 18th, 1784, to encourage literature and the arts, reading, plays, all those kinds of things, art, sculpture, all that kind of stuff. To encourage literature and the arts is a duty which every good citizen owes to his country. And if I could be instrumental in promoting these and in abiding your endeavors to do the like, it would give me pleasure. George Washington, like I talked to you a little bit about the types of literature and poetry that he liked. I named off a little bit of those people at the beginning of this video. And like I said, he had over 1,200 books, around 1,295 books in his personal library. If you go to Mount Vernon and look at his study, it's voluminous on the types of things he had. Another fantastic quote about George Washington. This is so awesome. This is one of my favorite quotes about George Washington and books and information. Is he says, I can't stop smiling when I read this, is George Washington to Lawrence Lewis on August 4th, 1797. He said, I have a great many instructive books on many subjects, as well as amusing ones. I have a great many instructive books on many subjects, as well as amusing ones. Meaning George Washington had all kinds, a plethora, myriad of different subjects, like I said, from history to philosophy to economics to poetry to literature to art, architecture, all kinds of books. The last George Washington quote about this, about where do you get your information, that's where this is going at. George Washington said to Steptoe Washington on December 5th, 1790, a good moral character is first essential in a man, or in a person, in a citizen, and that the habits contracted at your age, because this was a young relative of George Washington's, and the habits contracted at your age are generally indelible, and your conduct here may stamp your character through life. It is therefore highly important that you should endeavor not only to be learned, but virtuous. Now, I have some friends that are going to school to be architects. I mean, that my friend is going to school to be an architect is in my opinion, phenomenally intelligent. I don't know anything about architecture. I learn so much from them every time I talk to them about architecture, and then they talk to me about history. It's like a give and give situation. It's fantastic. I have another friend when I learn about painting and art and what they do with how they choose their colors and their canvas and everything. It's so fantastic. And then other people who are proficient in economics or proficient in other things. And that's how you gain your scope and perspective. It's not to think that you know everything about everything. You may be very expert and proficient at one thing or maybe two things. And if you're super, into a lot of stuff, maybe three. I don't know you. Maybe you're into a lot more. But definitely maybe one or two things. And for me, I really love learning about George Washington, and I really, really love studying and learning about Greek, Aramaic, and Hebrew. And that's what I'm good at. I think I am. I'm probably not perfect. I never went to school for these things. I just read a bunch of books, all kinds of books from all over the world. And you can really learn a lot from people by just listening. And like the people I mentioned before in my life that are architects or painters or proficient in economics, I learn a lot. And I know me and these people think differently about a lot of things, but I learned so much from them by just listening. And that's what George Washington did. He read a lot and he listened a lot. And his culture and his time, he changed his heart on many things because he was well versed and wanting in what he read, and also, excuse me, excuse me, in what he read, but he also wanted to listen to other people's perspectives, and that's who he chose to be around him in his cabinet, in his family, and everything else is because he wanted to have people that were very proficient in the time and culture in which he lived to be surrounded, because he knew that they were experts in certain areas more so in a little bit than he was. So I'll put all the sources to this video in the description below. Don't forget to keep reading, keep studying, and not to be ashamed of what you're reading or studying. Whether you just read stuff online, get a full scope, like I said, of whether it's conservative or liberal or left or right or whatever you're reading, or different types of philosophy and economics, or different types of thought and literature or art. Or if you want to look about certain presidents to study them, whoever and whoever. So I just suggest just to get a full scope. Don't just stick with one ideology. Get a full scope and really see what fits for you. But thank you for watching this video, and don't forget to click subscribe, click the notification bell, and give it a thumbs up if you like this video. And oh yeah, so that's it, and I'll talk to you soon. You're the best. Bye.